Well, the Mongols were the most ruthless people that probably ever existed. I think as a warrior class, as warriors, they had the least value of human life.
When these Dodge and Catlin and these various people saw Comanches in Texas in 1830s, they just flat couldn't believe what they were looking at.
A Comanche warrior just fired his 20th arrow. You're still reloading your musket. He's hanging sideways off a galloping horse, completely invisible behind the animal's body. You can't even see him to shoot back. 600 years earlier, on the other side of the planet, a Mongol warrior is doing the exact same thing to a heavily armored knight. These two cultures never met, never even knew the other existed. So how did they independently create the most terrifying cavalry force their enemies had ever seen, using identical tactics, identical training, and identical weapons? And more importantly, if they fought each other, who would win? I'm about to show you. Let's ride.
The Mongols succeeded because of their discipline, their speed and their discipline, and the awe in which they were held.
The Mongol Empire, the largest connecting land empire in human history. From Korea to Hungary, 12 million square miles taken over by conquerors who effectively lived on horseback. And then there's the Comanche Empire. Yes, that's how historians actually call it. 250,000 square miles of the Great Plains of America that they controlled so completely, they delayed westward expansion for over 40 years. The US Army called them the finest light cavalry in the world. Here's what's wild. These two cultures, separated by 600 years and half the planet, developed almost identical military systems. Same training age, same weapons, same tactics, even the same number of horses per warrior. It's evolution, but for war. And once you understand why, you'll never look at military history the same way again. Both societies had the same insoluble issue. How do you protect huge amounts of terrain with tiny populations? The Mongols at their peak had maybe 200,000 warriors. That was it. But they needed to defeat the Jin dynasty, a Chinese empire that had hundreds of thousands of men, walled cities, and sophisticated siege engines. The Comanches? Never more than 4,000 effective fighting men. But they needed to fight 3 colonial empires simultaneously, Spanish, Mexican, and American, while fending off rival tribes and expanding trade networks across half a continent. The landscape itself was an enemy. For Mongols, it was the vast Eurasian steppe, limitless grasslands on which conventional armies would die of starvation since they could not carry enough supply. For Comanches, it was the brutal Great Plains, where sun during summer could kill you, blizzards in winter definitely would, and buffalo herds determined whether you feasted or starved. And isn't the irony here that both armies were outnumbered, under-equipped, and fighting armies who had superior armor, superior defenses, and eventually, superior weapons? How did they manage to reign for over 100 years each, then? The solution starts at age 3. Mongol boys were horseback riding at age 3. At age 5, they were issued their first bow. At age 16, they were full-fledged warriors who'd been horseback riding, archery, and hunting for over 10 years. Comanche boys? Same timeline. Age 3 on horseback. Age 5 riding horses independently. At age 15, they went through a vision quest. 4 days by themselves in the plains with nothing but a buffalo robe, praying for a guardian spirit to appear. But this is what made them different from all other warring forces in history. They did not practice for war, they practiced by war. Hunting was not practice, it was actual. A Mongol boy tracking deer learned the same things he'd do tracking enemy scouts. A Comanche boy running down buffalo at full gallop was literally doing nothing but what he'd do in battle. George Catlin, an artist who had observed Comanche warriors in 1834, called them awkward as monkeys on the ground, but at once graceful and handsome the minute they reached for a horse. They were not learning to ride, they were learning to become centaurs. Now, both cultures had access to the same weapon that would define their dominance, the composite bow. This isn't your Renaissance fair longbow. A composite bow was a technological marvel. Layers of wood, horn, and sinew glued together and curved backward. The horn compressed, the sinew stretched, and when you released, all that stored energy exploded. Mongol bows have 160 pounds draw weight, accurate up to 300 meters, twice the range of a European bow. A Mongol archer carried 90 arrows in 3 quivers and could spend them all in minutes, charging full bore in any direction. Comanche bows were 4 feet shorter, but no less deadly. 50 to 70 pounds draw weight, ideal for quick firing from horseback. And here's the horrific part. Their war arrows featured swept-back barbs that lodged deep in the wound and broke off. Good luck removing that. But the ultimate weapon? The horses themselves. Each soldier had 3 to 5 horses at least. The elite troops had 20. Why? So they could change mounts constantly, riding 60 to 75 miles a day constantly. No supply trains, no rest camps, pure, unadulterated mobility. The horses grazed on grass. The soldiers lived on mare's milk. As a last resort, they'd consume blood drawn from live horses. They were a mobile military force that could fight for months without needing resupply. Comanches took it one step further. Their leaders kept up to 1,500 horses. They controlled the whole horse trade network on the Great Plains. And because the Southern Plains allowed breeding year-round, they were able to breed horses faster than tribes located farther north, giving them an economic and military force that could not be stopped. Okay, this is where things get frightening. Mongols created a tactic called the feigned retreat. They fight an enemy, loose a few arrows, and then retreat in terror. The enemy follows them thinking they have won. Units become stretched out. Discipline is lost. Then the Mongols turn around. New heavy cavalry appears out of thin air, and the retreat becomes an encirclement. It's a trap, and it worked on everyone from European knights to Chinese foot soldiers because it was an appeal to universal human psychology. The desire to pursue fleeing foes. The Comanches didn't use formations like that. They were too decentralized. They instead mastered what Catlin called the most astonishing horsemanship he'd ever seen: the hanging technique. At full gallop, the Comanche warrior would lean his entire body off the side of his horse, hook his heel over the horse's back, and use a horsehair loop as a crutch. From there, entirely shielded by the horse's body, he could shoot arrows, shift sides in seconds, or retrieve fallen comrades, all while battling a 14-foot lance. Try that on your local riding lessons. The historical showdowns. Let's discuss what occurred when these fighters were presented with their most significant challenges. The Mongols conquer the Khwarazmian Empire, one of the greatest Islamic empires the world has ever seen. 50-foot thick walled cities, hundreds of thousands strong armies. The Mongols came with 90,000 to 200,000 troops and systematically razed everything. Bukhara, Samarkand, Nishapur, cities that were centuries old, were so thoroughly sacked they never regained their former glory. The Mongols adopted Chinese siege tactics, employed Persian engineers, and learned so quickly that their enemies could not counter-adapt. Fast forward to 1840, the Great Comanche Raid. Buffalo Hump is at the head of over 500 warriors on a revenge mission to Texas. They ride only at night by the full moon, covering hundreds of miles undetected. At dawn, they assault the port town of Linville, slaying over 25 Texans and capturing vast quantities of horses and goods. Linville never regained its former vitality. But the question that you are really asking is this: if these two armies clashed on an open plain, who is the winner? Here is my reasoning. In a large pitched battle, the Mongols are the winners, and this is why. Organization. The Mongols had organized 10,000 warriors with their decimal system, executing sophisticated maneuvers such as the Tulushma encirclement with ease. The Comanches operated in autonomous war parties which were never more than 500 warriors in number. Against disciplined Mongol units, that's a killing liability. Numbers. The Mongols always used tumans of 10,000 troops. The Comanches never had more than 4,000 active warriors in total, by all bands. In a stand-up battle, the Mongols would merely overwhelm them with sheer numbers. Armor. Mongol heavy horsemen had 10-plus kilogram lamellar armor that would stop arrow fire and sword cuts. Comanche buffalo hide shields could not offer that level of protection. 5-piece sets of armor covered Mongol horses. In an attrition battle, that would matter. But, and here is the point, On a Great Plains guerrilla campaign, the Comanches win. Terrain knowledge. The Comanches knew all the canyons, streams, and lines of retreat within Comancheria. The Mongols, hundreds of miles from home base, would have a tremendous disadvantage. Hit and run ability. Comanche tactics were based on raid, not conquest. They'd strike at dawn, be off before the Mongols could mobilize to retaliate, and regroup at planned points the enemy couldn't find out. Operational autonomy. Comanches had no supply lines or stores of forage. They survived entirely on the buffalo and were aware where the herds were. The Mongols, as autonomous as they were, still had to have organized logistics on a large scale. So let's summarize what we've learned. The Comanches and Mongols represent the perfection of horseback war, forged through very similar methods. Childhood training that cultivated superhuman horsemanship, domination of composite bows for speed faster than gunfire, multiple horses enabling unceasing mobility, and cultures which equated war excellence with the greatest indicator of value. The Mongols built the largest empire in recorded history through the application of centralized organization and adaptive strategies capable of toppling anyone from Chinese cities to European kingdoms. The Comanches built a regional empire by decentralized guerrilla warfare that drove away 3 colonial powers and controlled the Great Plains for over a century. Same foundation, different strategic contexts, both absolutely terrifying. Eventually, all were overcome by the same forces: epidemic illness, pure numbers, and technological innovation. The Mongol Empire disintegrated when gunpowder-based weapons negated the advantage of horseback warriors. The Comanche Empire was finished when buffalo herds were systematically slaughtered and repeating rifles negated their fast-shooting bow advantage. But for their time, they were unbeatable. All right, here's the question I have. Team Mongol or Team Comanche? Who impressed you more? Leave your answer in the comments and tell me why. And here's the final question. If you could train for a year in one of these warrior cultures, which one would you choose? The tightly disciplined Mongol war machine or the open-range Comanche raiding lifestyle? If you want to see more deep dives into historical combat and military tactics that actually mattered, check out our video Alexander the Great versus Genghis Khan. And hit subscribe because we're just getting started. Thanks for watching. Stay epic and extraordinary.